I don't know if you remember, but it's been almost a year since the budget cards from AMD and Nvidia were released. May 2025 for the 5060 and June 2025 for the RX 9060 XT. And there's been a lot of hate when these cards were released, mostly because they were limited in VRAM, like they've got 8GB versions. However, in 2026, these cards are now 10 or 20% over MSRP, and that's because we now have a memory crisis. If you're going to be buying between both of these cards, which one would offer you better value? Now, obviously, we don't have this 8GB RX 9060 XT, so we'll just use the 16GB for now and just make some assumptions. We're going to run both of these cards in multiple games, 1080p, 1440p, and even 4K. Let's start with our first game. Arc Raiders, 1080p, low settings because we want to see the rats, right? We want to see those freaking rats. In here, boys, we've got really high FPS for both cards, and yes, about 190 FPS for both cards, but we did get higher lows with our RX 9060 XT. Let's see how this one goes on a higher resolution later on. Next game is Cyberpunk 2077. Now, this game usually favors NVIDIA cards from my experience, and you can see that in here, boys. Like, we got high FPS for both cards, but you can see the micro stuttering in here with our RX 9060 XT in certain scenarios, and this is why we get higher average FPS with the RX 9060 XT but lower lows. Let's go to another game. Oblivion Remastered. This game consumes a lot of VRAM. Only put this in here just for comparison, and in here, boys, we're getting better average FPS with the RX 9060 and obviously better lows as well. The 0.1% lows are higher, and this could be due to the VRAM aspect. Now, we have exceeded the 8GB VRAM limit in here, and as I've said, I don't have the 8GB RX 9060, so we'll just maybe exclude this in our results later on. Moving on to massive multiplayer shooters now, and we've got Battlefield 6 here, low settings. We want to maximize visibility, right, and responsiveness. And in here, boys, the RX 9060 is once again better compared to the RTX 5060. Another massive multiplayer shooter game is Delta Force, and once again, this one on our walking benchmark, the RX 9060 XT just dominates the 5060. Look at that one, 70% better on average FPS, 15% better on the lows, and when we go to the firing benchmark, it even increases that average FPS to 26%. And PUBG, the average FPS goes to the RX 9060 XT still. However, we're getting really high FPS between both of these. You can go with either way in this one. Let's go to our competitive shooters now, and we've got Fortnite performance mode in here, DX12 on both cards. Look at the GPU usage. The RX 9060 utilizes 99% of its GPU in performance mode, while it's only using 61% or 69% with the 5060. However, in saying that, we're still getting lower performance with our RX 9060, 27% lower and the 1% lows, and even much lower and the 0.1% lows. Let's go to another competitive shooter, Valorant. Now, in here, you're getting high FPS for both cards, around 400 for both cards, but on the results, you're still getting better performance with the 5060. I know a lot of people will say, oh, these are just competitive games and they're just lower usage. The thing is, with different cards, they also behave differently on lower usage scenarios, and we can see that in here. The 5060 is definitely better if you're just playing at 1080p of Valorant. Let's go to another game, Apex Legends. Now, this one has a 300 FPS limit, and look at that one, boys. The RX 9060 XT, once again, dominating the 5060 and the heavy action scenes. Let's go on the static scenes, 7% better. 777 actually. Another hero shooter is Marvel Rivals, and in here, boys, we're getting good numbers with our RX 9060 XT. There's that thing about the 0.1% lows, but I think this is just in loading the benchmark. There's just that dip when the benchmark starts with RX 9060 XT. But we'll see how this one turns out when we go to 1440p. Helldivers 2 now, and we're getting really high FPS for both cards, but better results still goes to the RX 9060 XT on our running benchmark, and on our stratagem benchmark, it's the same thing, right? 12% better on the average FPS, 15% better on the lows. Path of Exile 2 now. Now, this game heavily favors NVIDIA cards. However, in this scenario, the RX 9060 XT manages to maintain that lead over the RTX 5060. Now, we're running DLSS and FSR in here, but that's mostly for anti-aliasing, and we have just left it at native. Next up is World of Tanks, and once again we're getting really high FPS for both cards in here, and the RX 9060 XT is getting us slightly better results here. Now this game normally favors NVIDIA hardware, but in this case the raw performance of the RX 9060 XT is just pushing through. Before we proceed, boys, if you enjoy our content, come join my Patreon. It's totally free. You can access most of my posts and other videos which I don't post here on YouTube. Thank you so much to our Patreons, and let's go back to the video. Okay, let's go to 1440p now, and on Arc Raiders, we're still getting better results with our RX 9060 XT. We do have upscalers now for both cards. Yes, the RX 9060 XT is still winning here. Let's move on to Cyberpunk 2077, and you can see that the RTX 5060 is now getting better results here in terms of stability. Look at that one. You're getting micro status with the RX 9060 XT in certain scenes. And that's why it would always get those lower lows. We're just putting Oblivion in here just for reference, and you can see in this one, boys, how much the VRAM affects the performance, and this is why we're getting really better lows with the RX 9060 XT, and that's because this card has the 16GB, but I'm just putting this out here because I don't have the 8GB card, right? We'll probably have to exclude this in the results later on. Battlefield 6 now, and we're still getting 100 plus FPS, although you are getting 140 FPS with RX 9060 XT, and it continues to lead over the 5060. Let's go Delta Force, and it's the same thing with Delta Force, right? You're getting better average FPS and lows with RX 9060 XT on the walking benchmark. On the firing benchmark, it's the same thing, 15% better compared to the RTX 5060. Let's go to PUBG. We're still getting almost 200 FPS for the 5060 at 200 plus for the 9060 XT, and the 9060 XT with its raw performance is still able to push through and lead against the 5060. Let's go back to our competitive shooters now, Fortnite, and here we have both cards are now fully utilized, right? I mean, the 5060 is now using about 90% more, 97, 99% GPU usage. And on the results, boom, the 5060 still maintains better stability over the 9060 XT. Let's go to Valorant. And this one, boys, is a bit different. Now that we have slightly higher usage on both our GPUs, the RX 9060 XT is now starting to pull through. Whereas on the 1080p, the 5060 performs better on those lower GPU usage scenarios. Apex Legends now on our heavy action benchmark, and boom, look at that one, boys. RX 9060 XT is definitely the choice here. It even leads higher on our static benchmark, right? Let's go back to Marvel Rivals. We've got upscalers in here. DLSS on the NVIDIA card and FSR4 on the RX 9060 XT, and wow. So they're almost the same here, apart from the 0.1% lows. Ooh, interesting. Helldivers 2 now on our Gatling benchmark. The RX 9060 XT still maintains that average FPS and the lows compared to the RTX 5060. When we go to our Stratagem benchmark, the RX 9060 XT is still slightly better compared to the RTX 5060. Path of Exile 2 now, and we've got upscalers now on both cards. DLSS on the 5060 and FSR on the 9060 XT. And you can see that the RTX 5060 is definitely leading now compared to when we were at 1080p. World of Tanks now, we've got really high FPS for both cards, 150, 160 for both cards. And look at that one, boys. The lows still go to our RX 9060 XT, though the RTX 5060 is now pushing its raw FPS. Okay, let's go with 4K testings. We've just run a few games in here with practical settings. So let's start with Arc Raiders, and we've got upscalers in here, both set to performance setting, and we're getting good FPS, 110, 115 FPS for both cards, although the RTX 5060 is actually better here in terms of raw FPS. Slightly better, but still better. Let's go to Cyberpunk 2077, and here we go, boys. The micro stuttering on the RX 9060 XT is now much worse, right? You can see that it's just like bouncing there. Right now, we do have upscalers once again in both cards in here, DLSS and FSR4 for the AMD card, and we've set a performance setting for the upscaling. And yes, you will definitely get better performance here with the RTX 5060. In terms of PUBG, yes, you're getting a raw FPS goes to the RTX 5060, but you're getting better stability with our RX 9060 XT in terms of the low. And last up is World of Tanks, and look at the micro stuttering with our RX 9060 XT, boys. That's really bad, right? That's really bad. One other thing we forgot to talk about is the power consumption for both cards. So the RX 9060 XT does consume a little bit more power compared to our RTX 5060. We're getting about 140 watts with the RTX 5060, while we're getting 170 watts with the RX 9060 XT. If you look at this one overall, at 1080p, you're getting about 10% better average FPS with the RX 9060 XT, 6% better in terms of 1% lows, and about 9% better in the 0.1% lows. At 1440p, you're getting about 9% better FPS with our RX 9060 XT. That's 11% better in terms of the 1% lows, and 3% better in terms of the 0.1% lows. Although, if you remove Oblivion in this scenario because of the VRAM limitation, we're just gonna get the same average FPS, but then the 1% lows will drop to 9% now from 11%, and the 0.1% lows will drop to 1% better from 3%. At 4K, now we're getting lesser performance overall with our RX 9060 XT. That's 4% less in terms of average FPS, 6% less in terms of the 1% lows, and 10% lower in terms of the 0.1% lows. Now, even with the 16GB VRAM of this card, the RTX 5060 actually performs better in these scenarios. And yes, we do have titles in here which seem to favor NVIDIA cards, but these are practical scenarios. At 1080p and 1440p, you'll be better off with the RX 9060 XT in most games. However, there will always be outliers like Cyberpunk 2077, which just runs more stable with the RTX 5060. And if you're only playing Fortnite with the realistic settings, performance mode, that's how you would play it competitively, the RTX 5060 is the only card for you. Valorant also works well at 1080p with the RTX 5060. Now, I've highlighted this one because it's important to show how both of these cards perform on low GPU usage scenarios like at 1080p. So if you're just playing the games in here, apart from the outliers, then the RX 9060 XT will be the obvious choice in terms of raw performance. And yes, you can pick the RTX 5060 just for those specific use cases wherein it just excels in certain games. Speaking of options, there's also another card which you guys might like to consider, and that's the Intel B580. Now, this card comes with 12GB of VRAM, much higher compared to our 8GB cards here. And we tested this card out against the GOAT, the RTX 3070, which yielded really interesting results. So if you're keen to look at that one, just click this video right here. Just click that one. Click that one. Just click it, bro. Click it.